Have you ever found yourself wondering, how does the DM know how difficult something is? Or maybe you've been dungeon mastering and you've been wondering, how easy is it to do something easy? And what's the difference between something easy and something hard? Well, I don't blame you, because the player's handbook doesn't do a very good job of explaining what the difference between something easy and something hard is. If you've read this part of the handbook, you know that it just gives you a table that says 5 is very easy, 10 is easy, 15 is medium, and so on, all the way up to 30, which is impossible. But I do have a theory as to how you can work it out in your head. And this is the way we're gonna do it. So in the famous words of Matt Colville, this die works in increments of 5%. And henceforth, D&D itself works in increments of 5% chance. So that means for every one number on a D20, we have a 5% chance of rolling it. So if we're setting a threshold for how high one must roll, we have to add the percentage of numbers below that number and the percentage of numbers above that number. That way we know the probability of someone succeeding or failing the roll. I know, words don't make sense that way. Let me just give you an example. The DC of something that is very easy is 5. And remember, we're operating on the assumption of if you meet the DC, you beat it. So that means if we roll a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4, we fail. But if we roll a 5 or anything else, we succeed. So if we do 1, 2, 3, and 4, each of those equal 5%, that means we have a 20% chance of failing and an 80% chance of success. And at this point, we could factor in a skill modifier of a bonus of some kind, but we're not going to get into that right yet. Note that this doesn't preclude the circumstances of the task. So for example, the task could be opening a jar, but whether or not that jar is filled with just water that you want to drink, or a bunch of tiny pixies that are trapped in a glass case and need to go home, doesn't change the difficulty of the task. But if probability states that 8 times out of 10 we are going to succeed, and 2 times out of 10 we are going to fail at that task, how do we contextualize those numbers? There are some things in D&D that many DMs sort of unanimously agree that nobody needs to roll for. There is, for example, an assumption that your character can walk, your character can breathe, your character can drink water and eat food with table manners and do whatever else a normal human being would do on any given day. But for those who are stuck on the math, you could consider all of these tasks something that your character is proficient at, and therefore you would add your proficiency bonus to those checks. So for example, if you consider walking having a 95% chance of success and a 5% chance of failure, you could say that your character never fails at walking, because even if you roll a 1, you would add +1 at the very minimum to that roll, because you are proficient at walking. And I know the sticklers are thinking right now, but what about the 5%? And yes, we acknowledge that you can fail at something that you're proficient at, or that is so easy that it's so unlikely that you'd fail that you don't really have to think about it. But since the game rules are made to simplify things like that for you, so you don't have to think about them, we can lean on the convenience that D&D gives us so that we don't have to think about it. But what sorts of things, then, would you fail at about 2 times out of 10? You could then, if you like, look up the statistics on average, how successful are humans at doing specific tasks. But since we have to apply this to a setting that includes things like magic, it might not be the most effective way to do it. We can, though, look at the rules. In the rules of combat, any ability check would consume your action. So it stands to reason that if you're going to make an ability check for something, it might take you at least 6 seconds. Whether that includes prep, the performance of the task, the planning, whatever. It's all in there, and it's all consumed by an action. Now we have to think about what things are so difficult that they would take you at least 6 seconds to do. Everyone probably has their own barometer here, and that's what makes their game special. But for me, something like unlocking a door would definitely take more than 6 seconds. Maybe something like opening a jar might take more than 6 seconds, depending on how hard the cap is on the jar. So now that we have a minimum amount of time it would take to warrant a roll, how do we figure out difficulty? Remember that something very easy is something that you'd fail at 20% of the time. So what causes us to fail? The easiest metric that I use is to think about how long it would take to learn enough or get skilled enough at a task so that you make it that you never fail at the task. Or in D&D rules talk, how long would it take you to get proficient? The skills in D&D are a little bit nebulous on purpose. For example, if someone is good at athletics in D&D, they could be a professional javelin thrower, or they could just be really, really good at running. But it might be easier to think about it from the lens of level. How much training, or what level would you have to be able to run a 10K? If we want to apply this more directly to life, we could say level 1 of someone trying a skill could be their first time trying that skill, and level 20 would be the best woodworker in the world. So we can think about this metric as someone's aptitude for success, because inherently how good you are at something is going to determine how easy it is for you to succeed. Now, I don't have an exact equation for how to combine those things so that you can set all your DCs perfectly mathematically correct. But a general metric that I could think to use is if you think about the player levels as the amount of years one has been doing a certain skill. Then I imagine that would probably be enough for you to go on Reddit and ask several skill forums how hard it is to do the things that they do. But that's just a theory, and you can play however you want.